Reason versus intuition. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. Jesus, when addressing his critics, appealed to reason and common sense. In his training of the disciples, however, he, like all great masters, encouraged in them the development of a higher faculty, soul intuition. For it is only by intuition that spiritual perceptions are achieved. In chapter 16 of the Gospel of St. Matthew, we find Jesus drawing on the intuition of his disciples by asking them who they thought he was in reality. They immediately understood that he wanted from them was a subtle answer, not some obvious reply based on his nationality, sex, and the like. Peter it was at last who understood and answered the question on its intended level, the spiritual. "Thou art the Christ," he said, "the Son of the living God." And Jesus turned to him, saying, "Blessed art thou, Simon, son of Jonah, for not by human nature was this truth revealed to thee, but by the heavenly Father. And I tell thee this also, thou art Peter, which is to say, a rock, and upon this rock I will build my church, and never will the powers of darkness overwhelm it." Jesus was pleased with his disciple for relating to the question on its deepest level. Reason could not have given Peter the answer. The answer came through the faculty of soul intuition, and proved him thereby to be a spiritually advanced disciple. It was his intuitive perception, that insight which cannot be shaken by tempests of unreasonable doubt, that Jesus praised in referring to him as a rock. The church he referred to next was the edifice of cosmic consciousness. Any outer church institution would have to depend, as in fact the Christian churches have always done, on the level of understanding of its individual leaders and members. Peter's intuitive perceptions could never have been passed on to an outward succession of prelates or high priests. Clarity comes from direct soul perception. Confusion results from excessive dependence on reason as a guide to understanding. As the second chapter of the Bhagavad Gita states, "When your intellect, at present confused by the diversity of teaching in the scriptures, becomes steadfast in the ecstasy of deep meditation, then you will achieve final union with God." Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind.
This past Wednesday we celebrated Yogananda's life, because Wednesday was the 60th anniversary of his passing, which we call the Mahasamadhi, which is a master's conscious exit from the body. Not all of us are privileged to consciously exit the body. We tend to not do it under our conscious control, but the master has that control. And along the lines of today's topic, reason versus intuition, I had an inspiration to share something with you. I'm going to play on the computer. It's just going to take me a moment. It's an excerpt of Yogananda's voice. We speak of the masters with great reverence, which they surely deserve, and they also come and bring us deep spiritual revelations, life-saving, in fact. And I know all of us have been touched in some way on that level. And yet, of course, at least the greatest charm for me about Yogananda was just how natural he was with his spirituality. There are some saints that, as Yogananda himself described, have to be completely separate, just unaffected, untouched by anything, just because they have to demonstrate that complete detachment from the world and inspire that in their disciples. And yet, as Swamiji has said of Yogananda, he didn't need to maintain that separation, that he was a child of God and was free in the world and didn't have to hold it at bay. And so he could take great pleasure in things without ever forgetting that it was God's pleasure, God's joy he was experiencing through those things. We have to be a little more careful to maintain that consciousness so we don't get caught up in chocolate, for example. It's funny I said chocolate, I guess. There's a story Swami tells of going to a nunnery and they were giving him this tour, and he said it was a very kind of just like wispy, at one point, then I said, and this is where we worship Jesus. And then a priest, the head priest came in, and he had just been traveling, and he brought out some chocolate, in fact, and she said, "Ooh, chocolate!" Swami was the difference. We should go after God like chocolate. So because Master also expressed humor very often, and someone even said to me recently that was a great piece for him, that it was because of Yogananda's humor that it really helped open his heart to the whole path. So I wanted to play a little humorous story Yogananda shared. We can't imagine the challenges Yogananda had, having his dark skin, having long hair, wearing a dress, and especially in 1920. I mean, it just was not. Even Swami had challenges wearing a beard in 48. Just no one wore beards. And so it's just amazing to think of all of the, how life has progressed since then and how we think nothing of it nowadays, but it really was a big deal. And he encountered a lot of racism, actually. And you can read about that, and there's a book by one of his disciples, Durga Mata, who was one of the earliest who came to him. And when she came, she said there were like 15 people at Mount Washington or something like that, and her room was directly under Yogananda's balcony, and she could hear his footsteps above her at night, our first night in her room, sleeping there. So, I mean, what an experience. And yet, listen tonight, maybe you'll hear his footsteps above your head tonight. Because he lives on, and he said, he's more with us now than when he was in the body. And to those who think me near, I will be near. And if a master is omnipresent, that omnipresence does not exclude our little corner of the universe. He's most at home in our hearts, and we can experience him, as again, I'm sure you all have in different ways. Today's topic, reason versus intuition, is such an important topic because reason gets the upper hand so often in life. And I was wondering why. It's ironic in a way that Jesus said to Peter that, this perception has come to you through your own intuition. And so, thou art Peter the rock, and on this rock I will build my church. And that Catholic Church has interpreted that to mean that Peter wasn't the head of the Catholic Church, and all the popes who came after him were descended from him. And what did the Catholic Church do? But in the early days of Christianity, eliminate the Gnostic Movement, which was another parallel movement of the followers of Jesus who were dedicated to intuition. And so, again, a little bit ironic, but because Gnostic comes from the word gnosis, which means knowledge or perception. But why would that be the case? And I was reflecting on it in that in a darker time, we really do need reason. We even see the scientific revolution came out of reason. Galileo starting to roll balls down ramps and timing them with his pulse. and saying, okay, looks like they're accelerating, and deriving all the laws of motion and gravity just from his pulse, and watching. I mean, how hard is it to roll a ball down a ramp and measure it with your pulse? But nobody had done it before, and no one had brought that conclusion of, things accelerate as they fall, forces, gravity, the planets, everything, the way he did. He was an amazing person. And we needed reason to know that our conclusions were correct. We needed to test our theories, to debate about how many angels can dance on the head of a pin is fine, but you can't prove it. It doesn't mean anything, and so it all just becomes fierce debate. I was in academia for a long time. I was in a PhD program, and the following statement hurt my feelings, although I think it's partly because on a deep level I knew that it was true. They say that in academia the competition between researchers is so fierce because the stakes are so low. It doesn't really matter how many angels can dance on the head of a pin, so let's fight it out. Because if you could solve it just by saying, well, look, here's a pin and there's one angel on it, then we're okay, let's go home. What color are the flowers here? Oh, well, let's look at them, okay, and then we can settle it. Swami has made the point of dogma, that one's effort and ferocity in trying to prove a dogma increases in indirect proportion to the ability to prove one's point. In other words, if you can prove your point, you don't have to be upset about it. Or if someone else can disprove your point, oh, okay, I'm sorry, I realize now. But if you can't prove the point, here we go. And that's often the mistake that we can lead with intuition. If we have an intuition or a direct perception, it isn't necessarily helpful to approach others from the level of, with the justification, it was my intuition. Because it presupposes sort of a specialness for us. Well, it was my intuition, and well, what about your friend's intuition? What did they perceive? Swami Kriyananda is the most intuitive person I know, and yet he never justifies things that way. He says, I've always tried to convince people through sweet reason alone. Because it's reason and logic that's a fair playing ground in conversation, but that's not necessarily where our ideas come from. And what makes me laugh too is that scientists will say reason and research and proof. And I told this story before, but I can't resist telling it again, that I was in Petco, and there was a man saying, I bought these rawhide bones, and he said to the trainer, what do you think about these? And she said, I don't find them good. And he said, well, it says right here, Harvard study proves that rawhide bones decrease harder, or whatever is so fascinating about dogs' teeth. And she said, well, I don't believe it. He said, you don't believe Harvard? And she said, well, and I felt sad for her, because I thought all she had to say is, well, I believe my own experience. And my experience has shown that my dogs have had these problems or whatever it is. But, we hear Harvard and woo, you think twice about that. The reason why I say it's ironic that all of this is touted is that the greatest of scientists, in a way, Einstein, came through all of his discoveries through flashes of inspiration. He realized that if he were to travel at the speed of light, he would see light as a standing wave, as a wave that's not moving. And he realized that means the speed of light has to be constant. But he didn't run around saying that to people. He spent 10 years trying to work out the mathematics and to try to prove that, related to what we knew, that this was actually a logical conclusion. And even when he wrote it, only 10 people understood it. But they were the right 10 people, and they translated it for everyone else. And Richard Feynman was a great physicist who died not too long ago, and he actually really propounded doubt as the approach to life, which is very disappointing for me, because I loved his physics and his mathematics and his way of approaching it. And then he had a series of lectures called The Meaning of It All. And I thought, okay. And so I started reading it. And it was all about doubt and how we have to doubt everything. And we can't trust our experience. And yet, in another book, he talks about how after his wife died, he would walk down the street and go window shopping with her and talk to her in his heart. So how to resolve these? But even he, with all of this, one of his great discoveries in solving, I think it was Dirichlet's equation or something, he said he was trying so hard to think it out, and finally he just stopped and said, wait a minute, maybe this is easy. And he said he just mentally tapped the equation and it unraveled. And he saw the solution right there. And he said, I remember everything about that experience, and that it was a superconscious experience. He said, I remember the feeling of the pencil in my fingers. I remember the sound, the scratch it made on the paper. Everything I can resurrect in easy memory. That's a superconscious experience. Now, I think we needed to rely on reason to test whether our inspirations or our intuitions or our thoughts were true. Every intuition you have isn't necessarily a real intuition. Swami said once in meditation he beheld a large green face. He said, I don't think that was a superconscious experience. Didn't have any meaning. The easiest way to tell whether your experiences are true intuitions is to the degree to which they change your life. And to the degree to which you can remember them with clarity. Like, I had this wonderful dream of Master, and I can't really remember much of anything, but it was really fun. I mean, it's great to dream of Master, I don't criticize it. But when you have a superconscious dream, you remember everything about it easily, 10 years later, 15 years later. Now, but see, we're not in that same age anymore. Science has done its job, and it will continue on. But now that we've mastered reason as a society, we need to go to intuition. And intuition needs to take its rightful place as a recognition as the higher faculty in ourselves. Swami said recently that feeling is essential to consciousness. That's, in some ways, you could say, what makes us have consciousness, what makes us unique among the, as opposed to a thinking robot or a computer, is that we have that feeling. And the tool of feeling, calm feeling, is intuition. And how do we develop intuition? Well, there are a number of ways. One way is when you have if you're trying to make a decision and you have two alternatives, you can visualize yourself doing one of those alternatives and feel the response in your heart. I'll give you an example. A friend of ours from Ananda village was taking care of her father in his last days when he was ill. And she was working, caring for him week after week, and she was glad to do so, but of course, if you've ever cared for someone, you know how tiring it can be. And some friends of hers said, listen, we're coming out your way. Why don't you come with us and we'll just go skiing for the weekend? Her father had someone else who could help him while she was away. She said, you need to break, and how are you going to give if you're empty yourself, so come on. And so she said, sounds good. So she went into meditation, and this thought came to her, well, should I go? And she held up the thought, visualizing herself going on the ski trip. And she felt in her heart a hesitation, a tightness, a pinching, all of these kinds of feelings that maybe a nervousness, a little unsettledness. And she thought, that's odd because I'd like to go and it makes sense. And then she visualized herself staying another weekend, and she felt calm, or a joy, or peacefulness, a sense of brightness. I should mention that she broadcasted the thought from the spiritual eye. This is, Yogananda said, our broadcasting station. So when you're projecting a question or a thought out, project it here. Imagine yourself sending it to the infinite or directly into Divine Mother's ear. And then he said the radio set, the receiving station, is in our heart. That's where we receive the answer. So after feeling that this rightness about staying, she decided to stay. And she told her friends, and they said, But that was the weekend her father passed away. And there's no way she could have known that through reason, but her intuition told her. And we follow our intuition all the time. It's not a question of start using your intuition. We're always using our intuition, but we can use it more. And another way to develop intuition is to test it. When you hear a message, follow it. Which may sound ridiculous. Obviously, if I hear a message, I'll follow. But how many times, at least personally, do we say, rah, 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 rah? Like, for example, I've had a history with food poisoning, and both in India and here. And it gets to the point where I can put this fork or the spoon in the food, and I can hear, don't eat this. And after being food poisoned 168 times, at least, I go, I'm sure it'll be fine. Why? It's the idiocy principle. It's the ego saying, no, 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 that's ridiculous. Look at it, it looks fine. Look, it's a 5-star hotel. There's no way I've gotten sick at more 5-star hotels. Anyway. So, why not follow that voice? And I remember once I saw someone just sort of walking past, and I had this intuition about the person that actually wasn't particularly flattering. And I said to myself, that's ridiculous. Who are you to think about that person that way? How could you be so callous? What do you know? All this stuff. So I, yeah, right. Unfortunately, it turned out to be true. And it caused a great, huge problem in the work that I was working with. And it shocked me that actually that intuition hadn't been a criticism or a judgment. It had just been a perception of what this person was actually doing. And then I just assumed that I was judging it negatively and then beat myself up for judging it negatively. But it's possible to even see unflattering things and say, well, guess what? There's unflattering things everywhere you look, especially at ourselves. We look in the mirror. So that's what we're here to get free of. So it's okay. It's no big deal. This world is a school. This life is a lesson to graduate from. And yet, I want to say something about that, because we can sometimes make the mistake of thinking that we are just, barely spiritually evolved, and that we are desperately trying to climb this ladder all the way up so we can finally get into first grade. And it's just not true. To be attracted to Yogananda's teachings, Yogananda said to Swami, many people who have come here have been saints in the past, which means they're saints in the present. And he said to Yogananda, Kriyananda asked Yogananda, have I been your disciple for thousands of years? He said it, maybe I'm getting the quote wrong, but he said, you would have had to have been my disciple before to be here now. No, he said, have I been a yogi for thousands of years? And he said, you would have had to have been to be here now. And Swami had even mentioned that there are, Edgar Cayce has regressed a number of people to a time before, he did past life regressions, and regressed them to a time before their birth. And they all spoke of the great opportunity for spiritual growth that would occur during this time in Earth's history. It has to do with the changing of the yugas, which I won't go into right now. But it's important then, Swami said, when we look at our fellow devotees, and he said, and suppose we look at one of them and say, well, that's not much of a devotee. And he said, shame on us for judging anyone. He said, we're not responsible for anyone in this life except ourselves. And he said that if we look at them, we have to remember that most spiritual incarnations get to be spent in the cave. You get to be in the cave. So many times we're like, gosh, if I could just get to that cave. Because we were in the cave. And we like the cave. And especially in India, there's even the culture that people will even bring you food and make your life easy that way because they know the blessings they receive in offering to you. in modern day that can be a problem, because Yogananda said he was in a cave with other renunciates, and he could see how they were judging the people who were bringing them food, saying, oh, you know, it's this unfortunate worldly karma you have that draws you into family, and just kind of deigning to take a little morsel of food from this tarnished plate. And he said, what good is this doing them? This was an attitude that cropped up in Ananda village in the early years, that the monastics were the true devotees, and the householders were burdened with such a heavy karma. It's unfortunate that you have a husband, and it's unfortunate that you have children, but maybe you could take a step towards God in this life or the next one. And Swami saw that the model that people needed was not of single renunciates, but of married renunciates, because that was a model that no one had, no examples before them. That's part of the inspiration that led to the Nayaswami order all these years later. But it's important to remember that we have to take the following in the right way. But it's important to remember that we are angels. So often when the choir finishes singing in an event that Swami Kriyananda is present at, he'll say, you sang like angels and you are angels. In another occasion when he was in Italy trying to start a work in Italy, he opened the door where everybody was sleeping and he said, good morning, great souls. And some of the people present said they were looking around wondering who had come into the room. He realized they were talking about us. But you see what heroism it takes to say, I won't take an incarnation in the cave. I won't take an incarnation in the monastery. But I'll come during this time, which is full of materialism, full of temptation, full of violence actually, and turbulence, and not a lot of support for spiritual things on one level. Yet we all can feel, especially in LA, the great spiritual hunger that is in people's hearts. And so that's the time for which we've come. We are not free yet, but we are close. And as I was mentioning the other day, but I think it bears repeating, a friend of mine went to India and had a reading from Brigu, which many of you have heard Swami Kriyananda talk about his own readings from Brigu. And one of the things that the Brigu reading said was, in your past life you were a spiritual teacher and you were doing this certain practice, and you achieved Savikalpa Samadhi, which is the first stage of Samadhi. Savikalpa Samadhi is when in meditation we become one with the infinite. But when we come out of meditation, the ego is still there. And in the next stage, Nirvikalpa Samadhi, when we become one with the infinite, the ego dissolves, and then we retain that sense of oneness even when we're walking around freely. We don't have to only meditate to experience that. The danger with Savikalpa is that you become one with the infinite, and then you come out of it and say, I just found God. Hey everybody, I just found God. And as someone just told me recently, somebody told her, by the way, I just meditated and found God. Is there anything I can do for you? And that's what happens to us. That the ego starts to think, I'm God. Hey, this whole time I knew it. So, anyway, back to this friend with the Brigu reading. He said you had attained Savikalpa Samadhi. And she said to me, that's what makes me not believe the reading. And I said to her, that's what makes me believe the reading. We have to remember that these states, though we may not be able to be aware of them now, may have been in our past. And that we may be this close to finding freedom. When we say, let me find freedom in this lifetime, it should not be, let me find freedom in this lifetime. Yeah. Me? Are you kidding? I haven't even done my taxes yet. There's no way. Let's not pick it up by the wrong end of the telescope. We're looking out. Let me find freedom in this lifetime and be done. Because why? Because Why aren't we car thieves right now? Because we were expert car thieves. And we got caught and punished enough to say, okay, fine, I'll steal jewelry as much. But then we get caught, or maybe we don't get caught, but we feel that hollowness of, I know I've done something wrong, or else we feel the fear of, now everybody's going to come and take my jewelry now that I have so much. Why aren't we seeking to be politicians, or scientists, or rock stars, or whatever it is? Because we've done it. But then there is something that we are seeking to be. I wanted to be a computer scientist and mathematician. It's like, well, why is that sacred and holy if all these other things don't appeal to me because I've done them and they didn't give me what we want? But math will! No. Let's be done. Because even when we become free, we don't exit this world. When we attain that first stage of freedom, we have no ego left, so we cannot create new karma, and it puts a period to our ability to be enmeshed in this drama. We can't create new karma, but we still have all the past karma of incarnations. Yogananda put it this way, that if you're free and you have the karma to have a safe fall out of a window and crush you on the sidewalk, the safe will still fall, but you won't be there. Is that our karma returns to us, but there's no ego to hit, so it kind of passes through us. I don't exactly know the mechanics yet, but I hope that we all soon will. That stage is called being a Jivan Mukta. And then people, Jivan Muktas, use their past karma to return to earth and help others to find freedom. And so we have to remember that that too is what we're doing even now. Haridas loves to say that in spiritual community, sometimes we heal each other with a glance. You know that feeling, you're coming in, it's just kind of like, bah, and someone says, hi, how are you? And you think, oh, someone's actually happy to see me. I don't know why. If they knew my consciousness, they wouldn't be. But someone says, I'm happy to see you in spite of your consciousness. I'm happy to see you. And we can, huh. And that's the great gift that spiritual community brings. And so it's a wonderful joy and privilege for us all to walk this path together.